Have you ever noticed how in life so many things seem connected? Recently, I was talking with a guy, and him and his wife and their young family felt like they were having a hard time getting control of their finances. It seemed like nothing they could do enabled them to get ahead or even to catch up financially. That stress added to their lives, added to the anxiety, the stress around their marriage, and made things like medicating behaviors all that much more tempting to him. In the same way, our marriages are often connected with our recovery. Now, our recovery is not our marriage, and our marriage is not our recovery. But everything in life is connected at some level. When we're struggling in our marriage, our recovery just seems that much harder, doesn't it? So for this reason, I want to return to one last episode on marriage hacks. We'll call this Marriage Hacks Part 3. Partly because as we learn to navigate our relationships better and become a little more skillful in this area, it has positive spin-offs to every other area of our life, including our recovery and walking away from porn. Like the other two episodes, I want to challenge you to share this episode with your wife toward the goal of becoming better marriage partners. Welcome aboard.
Guys ready?
When it comes to porn, are you stuck, spinning out, or slipping backwards in your life? If so, then welcome to the Finding Traction podcast, a show dedicated to those who are looking to gain recovery momentum away from porn and toward the life and relationships they have always hoped for. Now, here's your host, Vern Tomke.
Well, before we get to these new marriage hacks, let me just say the fall is upon us. And if you are looking for a group to connect with other like-minded guys who want to walk away from porn, I would love you to check out the Finding Traction material. It's 52 video weeks, 15 to 20-minute video lessons. And you can do them individually, but even better, you can do them with a group of guys. One of the best ways to learn about it is to get on our free Circle Learning platform. And in the show notes, you'll see a sign up where you can get access to a whole bunch of free recovery resources. There's documents there and resources, things that you can download. And I think it will be a big help in your recovery efforts. Also, there's information on the groups. You can watch the first couple courses, the couple lessons of the Finding Traction material. So again, I encourage you to do that. If you want more information or you just want to, get on a free Zoom call with me and talk about your recovery needs, my email is bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. We'd love to see a couple new groups start up this fall. That's the fall of 2025. All right, well, let's get back to marriage hacks and talk a little bit about, first of all, a couple of the previous podcasts I did. And if you're new to the podcast, you can go back and check out these two previous podcasts. First of all, Marriage Hacks Part 1, I introduced 5 tools to help you become more skillful in your marriage relationship. The tools of same team, same jersey. You will see if I have to wear the hat. My buddy Matt Dobschutz and me have a bet coming up with Chicago and Dallas. I guess we'll find out by the time this podcast is out. We'll know who's wearing the other team's hat. But same team, same jersey. The first tool. 1 to 10 tool is the second one. The ABC method of expressing negative emotions. Number 4, the practice of gratitude. And number 5, the practice of asking, did I do anything to hurt you today? That was part 1. And in part 2, we reviewed the old love languages, which can be helpful in understanding your partner. We talked about the Magic 5. and regular overnight getaways. Those two were particularly around how to combat the threat of a developing parallel life between you and your partner. And finally, we finished that second podcast by talking about reducing escalation in your, conversations and your arguments. We talked about the difference between soft and harsh startups and the need to practice repair attempts. Finally, we did talk about solvable versus perpetual problems, and we're going to double back to that one as one of the extensions of one of the tools we introduced today. Okay, part 3. Let's give you a few new tools that I think will be super helpful if you learn to apply in your marriage life. Here's the first one, the tool of filters. Now, I don't know if you used to have an older type camera, one of those old 35 millimeter cameras, or you're really into photography. If you were really into photography in the olden days, you probably are familiar with those things called filters. And this was before, of course, Photoshop. So we're going way back. And a filter was something that you would screw onto your normal lens, and they added special effects and colors to your pictures. Some of them just added like certain color or UV filters, those kind of things. But others added more interesting special effects like a mist filter to give your pictures a dreamlike effect. They were halo filters where you could have the subject clear and then this wild rotating blur effect in the background. All of these special filters you could put on your regular normal camera lens to give you the effect you desired. Now, you might say, well, that's really interesting, Vern. What does that have to do with marriage? Well, let me put it this way. Have you ever noticed that some days are just normal? You're looking through and experiencing your life like a normal lens. You go about your day, you finish your day, and it's just another normal day. But other days, something happens which adds a filter to your day. Say you're at work and you have a fight with your coworker, or your boss corrects you unfairly, you feel, or adds one more thing that you don't have time to do. And now you're anxious and you're agitated and you're driving home. You have, right now, as you're driving home, you have an extra filter on your normal lens. And then what happens if you don't recognize that? You get home and your kids left all their stuff out on the front lawn and you snap at them, and then your wife gets frustrated. What's up with you? And you snap at her, and your whole evening is off to the crapper, right? None of that's ever happened to you, right? So, or it might happen to your wife. She fights with the kids, or she gets yet another agitating message from her mother or your mother, and you leave your socks out or fail to put your stuff away, and she now barks at you. And even though you left them out the last 2 days, but today somehow is different. And all of a sudden, or perhaps, it's that special time of the month, and it's especially hit hard this month, and she's, off her game. All of that is all about a filter which is going on in your life. And here is what a skillful partner does. First of all, they recognize it. And second thing they do is they communicate that to their partner. Now, let me be clear here. It doesn't excuse bad behavior on your part. But if you communicate that to your spouse and vice versa, it's more likely that they're going to give allowances to you and not take it personally that they have done something wrong or you've done something wrong. They just know that you had a rough day at the office or a rough day, whatever that is, and you have a filter on, and that mood will pass. And how are they going to navigate that, knowing that there is a mood on, there is a filter on the normal lens that you have. It makes a huge difference. If my wife is mad at me and I don't recognize that she had this happen or this happen, but then I go, what did I do wrong? I don't get it. But if I know that this happened and this happened, she communicates that to me, I am far more likely to give her allowances for when she's struggling in a day. And vice versa. She's far more likely to give me allowance if I've had a especially difficult day or I have this filter on. So it's a great tool. It's a great tool for couples and not just cameras. All right. So that's tool number one. Tool number two is what we're going to call bids for attention. Now, if you go back to the last episode, I said that the number one cause for divorce was a parallel lives, having two lives, between the husband and wife that are not connected, lives that are busy and disconnected. And over time, they develop all sorts of problems from their disconnection. Well, one of the ways of combating that, in addition to the idea of the magic five or getting away, is this idea about bids for attention. It's actually, you could also call this bids for connection. And studies have shown that one person will often make a bid for connection or a bid for attention to the other. Here's an example. You're sitting, near each other, and one partner says, "Hey, I had a weird dream last night." And the other partner could say, "Okay." That is turning down a bid for attention. Or the other partner could say, "Really? What was it about?" You see, a bid for attention was then reciprocated. It's either reciprocated or it's rejected. And what happens if your bid for attention or your wife's bid for attention is rejected? Studies would show that couples will then pull back, in one sense, to try to save face and protect themselves. They go into a bit of a shell. Can you see how crucial this would be for something like sex? You say, "Hey, do you think it's cold in here?" And your wife says, "I don't know, check the thermostat." Right? Or, "Yeah, come on over here, I'll warm you up." Now that's probably a little bit too scripted, but a bid, you can have bids for attention. When we took a marriage course, I remember this one couple, if one partner wanted to, have some fun or have sex, they would light this special candle. And the other partner could either reciprocate or blow the candle out, which meant not tonight. That seems a little harsh, but I've come to recognize that how important this is. In fact, I've come to recognize that I really suck at this area. My wife the other night, she said to me, and because she's trained in this stuff as well, it really drives me nuts. She really calls me on stuff at times. We were sitting, and it was over the course of a night. She said to me, this is just 2 nights ago. She says, "I have tried to connect with you like 2 or 3 times tonight, just to talk and find out where you're at, and you've completely shut me down. Like, what's going on?" And I said, "Oh, busted." Like I said, I said, "I've kind of been lost in my head. I apologize for not responding to those bids for connection." So again, it's one thing to be called out on those things. So here's the point. Number one is to recognize when a bid for attention is happening and learn the skill of turning toward your partner. I think I've said this on another podcast, but I think if there was going to be a new saint that, is going to be given sainthood. I don't care what denomination or religion you are. The person that invented pause TV should be a saint. I got into so much marriage crap over the years because when we're watching TV, I have tunnel vision and I have tunnel hearing to what's on TV. And all this other extraneous stuff, including what my wife is saying, is all background noise. I don't know if it's a male thing. I don't know if it's a Vern thing, but it got me in trouble again and again and again. And my wife has learned when she wants to say something, she will say, hey, hit pause for a sec. And that's a cue for me to hit pause. I'm not going to miss anything, even if it's a football game, and turn towards her and respond to her bid for attention, bid for connection. That's a really important one. All right, finally, tool number 3, and we're just going to call this learning to deal with gridlock. Or you could say becoming a gridlock archaeologist. And where I'm going with this is, have you ever noticed that in some issues in your marriage, and it seems like every marriage has got at least 1 or 2 issues where you feel stuck. You get down to this issue and you can't seem to resolve it. You are pushing against each other. One of the terms that is used in this area is called gridlock. It's like 2 fists pressed against each other, each trying to push the other in their direction, but being resisted. Gridlock. Well, one of the reasons for that could be, looking back and remembering from last marriage hacks, that you failed to recognize the difference between solvable and perpetual problems. So that could be one of the factors at play, and you need to go back and revisit that in marriage hacks number 2. But there also could be a series of things that you need to recognize. One of the biggest reasons for gridlock is that you very well may be dealing with an underlying issue that both of you are unaware of. If you've ever seen those pictures of icebergs where you can see both what's above the water and what's below the water, of course, the part that you see above the water is much smaller than the large part which is below the water. Think of that as a gridlock issue. And the goal is to learn to understand what is below the water. I think every man sometimes asks, do I really know my wife? I mean, even after 39 years of marriage, there's still things that are a mystery to me. And sometimes when we can't seem to get past certain issues or talk about issues or certainly resolve certain issues, it's really helpful to ask, you know what? Is there something going on under the surface here? Something that we are unaware of, or something that is unspoken that is playing a role in our present gridlock? Is there some area where we're in the fog, where things are unaware of, unspoken, and how the goal is, let's do our best to bring them out into the open, where we are aware of them, where they're spoken. We can have everything on the table. Let's surface as many of those underlying issues as possible. Well, what do you mean by that? And how does that play into gridlock? Let me give you 3 or 4 areas that really can play into those stuck places in your marriage. Here's the first one. Perhaps there's a hidden expectation that needs to be surfaced. Some of this is almost funny when you first get married. For example, in our family, my mom always took the garbage out. But in my wife's family, it was always her dad. And so the garbage would stay under the sink and start smelling and start overflowing. And my wife was going like, what's up? And I would go, and what's up? because both of us had the expectation from growing up that the other person was going to take the garbage out. We just assumed that that's the way it would play out until we both said, hey, in your family, who took out the garbage? Now, that's kind of a funny one, but sometimes those things are a little bit more problematic. One of the things that happens when we begin to surface our expectations is that we can ask ourselves, is this expectation realistic or is it unrealistic? For example, it would be unrealistic to say, I expect my future partner will make me happy. Or I expect my future partner will always want to have sex. Or I expect my future partner will change. You know, if we actually talk about those, I will actually begin to examine, do I have a realistic, a healthy expectation? There was a fun saying I heard that goes like this: a man marries a woman thinking she won't change, and she does. A woman marries a man thinking he will change, and he doesn't. So this is where we begin to surface those expectations that we have of the other person. And we start realizing, maybe this is why we always have gridlock, is because we have different expectations here. One of the things, we used to do a lot of premarital counseling, and one of the things we used to do with our couples, we used to say to them, I want you to write down 10 things that follow this question. I expect that my future partner will ... And I want you to write down 10 things that come to mind. And we would have both of them do them separately. And then we would have them exchange pages. And then towards the expectations of their partner, they would go through each of their partner's expectations and they would respond as to, I will always be able to fulfill this. I will sometimes be able to fulfill this. I will never be able to fulfill this. It was super helpful in helping premarital couples surface their expectations. And in the same way, I would say married couples, even couples that have been married for years and years, need to have that same conversation. So that is one area where I think that it's helpful to ask, why are we on gridlock? Maybe there's an expectation that needs to be surfaced and then needs to be talked about, needs to be examined. Maybe it's reasonable. Maybe it's unreasonable. You know, your house used to look a certain way when you had no kids. Now you've got 3 kids. Is it still reasonable that it looks like it did when you had 0 kids, et cetera, et cetera? You see where we're going? All right. So that's the first area possibility where gridlock could happen. Here's the second one. Perhaps there is a hidden story that needs to be surfaced. As you talk about your growing up, you will realize that it really plays into a lot of the ways you see life. For example, recently I told my wife I've done a few trips. I've been down to Vegas with some guys to do a recovery stuff, not to gamble or to walk the strip. I was looking at, I had been down to Brazil. I was talking about going biking with another guy. And all of a sudden I could tell that my wife was reacting really negatively. And I felt like, well, we talked about it. I don't see what the reaction's about. And when we talked about it, my wife began to share, she was from a military family. And her dad would go on these long trips, whatever they call practices, or there's a name for it. I wasn't in the military. And it just kind of surfaced in her, you know what? I don't want to live that way where you're out traveling a lot of times without me. And so it was interesting to have that story inform where we were struggling, with that discussion. I grew up on a farm. And I like to say I grew up on a cattle farm, but we never got to eat steak. That was my experience with farming. When my wife wanted to have a hobby farm, guess what my reaction was? Oh, yippee. No, it was very resistant to that. as an example. Maybe your attitudes towards spending money come from a story. Maybe your approaches to raising kids come out of a story you had. For example, I grew up with two parents at home, but my wife grew up with two working parents, and that really affected her view of how she wanted to raise our kids. Is there a hidden story at play? Here's the third one. Is there a hidden fear that needs to be surfaced? Sometimes the reason we react so strongly to certain events is because they trigger certain fears in us. Let's say a bill doesn't get paid and one of you flips out and you go, well, why? Well, it just triggers the fears that in our family we would get calls, let's say, from collection agencies, or it just, I had a parent that spent without ever thinking there was tomorrow. And I don't want to live that way. I'm afraid that we're going to, be in the same financial straits. That would be a fear. So oftentimes fears can be rooted in childhood experience or bad experiences. Or here's one, previous relationships. I remember the very first time that I was late, me and my wife were going out. And I actually was in a class. We were both at UBC. I was in a class. I was 15 minutes. It went longer than it should have had. And I was 15 minutes late. And my wife, my girlfriend at the time, was super ticked with me. And I'm going, well, what's going on here? Well, there was both a story and a fear. Her previous boyfriend had just often brushed her off, and they would make dates, and then he wouldn't show up and just kind of brush it off. And so there was the story, but then there was the fear that she wasn't important to him. I wasn't important. She wasn't important to me enough to be on time, enough to do what I said I was going to do or fulfill my promises, right? A hidden fear. There's interesting, I think it's Gary Smaller that talked about two primary fears, and there's many fears, but here's interesting. He says oftentimes there's two primary fears in a relationship. One is the fear of being controlled. That is where you lose control or agency or power over your life. Or the second one is the fear of being rejected or alone. And oftentimes he said that one couple will personify one fear and another couple will perhaps personify another fear. And you'll get into this fear dance between the two of you. So whenever you're facing what seems like gridlock, ask yourself, are some of these things going on that need to be surfaced? Let me give you one more. And this is, I've seen, especially important as couples have been married for quite a period of time, but it can cause gridlock, more serious gridlock than most anything I've seen. And that is this: there is an unfulfilled dream that needs to be surfaced. See, one of the most unifying ways of connecting with our partner is help identify and then helping our partner live out their deepest desires and dreams in life. And one of the main reasons that gridlock appears is that when one partner feels like the dreams that they have for their life are not being addressed or respected by the other. So if either spouse doesn't feel the importance let me put this again. When either spouse doesn't fully appreciate the importance of supporting his or her partner's dreams, gridlock becomes almost inevitable. Now, I recognize that there may be timing in place here. If you've got dreams to travel the world and you've got 3 young kids, well, timing, it may not be best. The timing may not be there, but I'm talking over time. If one partner feels like, you know what, this marriage feels all about me supporting your dreams, but doesn't feel that it's reciprocal to me, then you're going to have problems. So in all of these, whether or not it's a story, an expectation, a fear, a dream, whenever there's gridlock, whenever you get into those stuck places, ask yourself, is there something here that needs to be surfaced? And a good therapist can help you do all of that. Well, we're at 30 minutes, and that's probably my longest of the marriage hacks. But I think I've run out of marriage hacks that come to mind, unless 4 or 5 new ones come to mind. I hope that you recognize the value of truly understanding your partner. You become a student of your partner. You become someone that becomes skillful as a marriage partner. If you do, it will pay huge dividends for you. And it will also make the rest of your life go a lot more smoothly. And it will take a lot of pressure off why you look for medicating behaviors to solve or to escape from some of the conflict in your life. We'll see you next time.